Good afternoon, teacher. My name is Yadira Kando. My topic is Disseminated Fusariosis. Definition: A superficial which spreads on the locally invasive infection of the pathogenic species of the Fusarium food is the degree which is the often found in the soil and the water is transmitted to humans mainly by through inoculation. Continue my video.
Thank you for opening our link to reveal the results of your germination test. This short clip will explain what we found on our client seed samples and how we report the data on the report of seed analysis. As we take you through the steps that are involved in a germination test, you will note that all samples are tested in accordance with the protocols set out in the methods and procedures by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. As you know, the official germination test is conducted in an accredited laboratory, and it is the first fundamental step needed for establishing basic seed quality. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency stipulate that germination requires testing of 200 seeds. These seeds are tested in ideal conditions in the growth chamber to ensure optimum germination, as there is no stress.
Application is nurse. Sujet waiting of the locally infection. After excluding disseminated infection of the central system or both, administering voriconazole that served to control the Fusarium infection, held the wound hydration, postural challenge every 2 hours, talk vital signals, assess the degree of the pain, and healthy administration, assess the degree of the injury. Continue my video.
Disseminated intravascular coagulation, or DIC, describes a situation in which the process of hemostasis, which is when, after blood vessel wall injury, liquid blood rapidly becomes a gel, called coagulation, or clotting, starts to run out of control. When this happens, lots and lots of blood clots start to form in blood vessels serving various organs, leading to organ ischemia. DIC, though, is also called consumption coagulopathy, because all this clotting consumes platelets and clotting factors. Without enough platelets circulating in the blood, other parts of the body start to bleed, with even the slightest damage to the blood vessel walls. So paradoxically, patients have too much and too little clotting. Normally, after a cut and damage to the endothelium, or the inner lining of blood vessel walls, there's an immediate vasoconstriction or narrowing of the blood vessel, which limits the amount of blood flow. After that, some platelets adhere to the damaged vessel wall and become activated, and then recruit additional platelets to form a plug. The formation of the platelet plug is called primary hemostasis. After that, the coagulation cascade is activated. First off, in the blood there's a set of clotting factors, most of which are proteins synthesized by the liver. And usually these are inactive and just floating around in the blood. The coagulation cascade starts when one of these proteins gets proteolytically cleaved. This active protein then proteolytically cleaves and activates the next clotting factor, and so on. This cascade has a huge degree of amplification and takes only a few minutes from injury to clot formation. The final step is activation of the protein fibrinogen to fibrin, which deposits and polymerizes to form a mesh around the platelets. So these steps leading up to fibrin reinforcement of the platelet plug make up the process called secondary hemostasis and results in a hard clot at the site of the injury. Now, as soon as that clot's formed, the body's also initiating pathways to break down the clot so that it doesn't get bigger than it needs to be and dissolves when it's not needed anymore, a process called fibrinolysis. And this process produces fibrin degradation products. Normally, the formation of new clots and the process of fibrinolysis are in a steady balance. Now, in serious medical conditions, like for example sepsis, malignancy, serious trauma, obstetric complications, or intravascular hemolysis, like you might see with blood type incompatibility, there can be a release of a procoagulant that tips the scales in favor of clot formation. Procoagulants could be proteins, like tissue factor, or bacterial components, like lipopolysaccharide. Or it could even be the presence of enzymes that help to proteolytically cleave and activate clotting factors. Whatever the cause is, in response, the coagulation pathway goes into overdrive, resulting in widespread clot formation, which plugs up medium and small blood vessels, which leads to ischemia, necrosis, and eventually organ damage. The kidneys, liver, lungs, and brain are particularly susceptible. The massive formation of clots throughout the body depletes the supply of platelets and clotting factors. To make things worse, as those clots are broken down through fibrinolysis, fibrin degradation products are released into the circulation, and these interfere with platelet aggregation and clot formation, making hemostasis even more difficult. And the result is this paradox, right? On one side you have thrombosis, which is when clots obstruct the vessel. And at the same time, you have trouble forming new clots, which leads to bleeding. Laboratory findings in disseminated intravascular coagulation include decreased platelets and decreased fibrinogen. There's also a prolonged prothrombin time, or PT, as well as prolonged partial thromboplastin time, or PTT, both of which reflect having lower levels of circulating coagulation factors. There are elevated levels of D-dimer, which is a fibrin degradation product that's produced when fibrin clots are broken down. Now, it's worth mentioning that in some cases, disseminated intravascular coagulation can be a more chronic process, like in individuals with certain solid tumors and large aortic aneurysms. And in those situations, there might be physiologic compensation, which makes the lab results look relatively normal. In either acute or chronic DIC, the treatment focuses on treating the underlying cause, because that's what drives the activation of the coagulation cascade. In addition, the goals are to support the various organs, using measures like ventilator support, hemodynamic support, and transfusions if they're needed. Alright, as a quick recap, DIC happens when the balance between forming new clots and breaking down clots is tipped in favor of clots, which leads to widespread clotting and organ ischemia, while at the same time depletes clotting factors, paradoxically leading to bleeding. Thanks for watching. You can help support us by donating.
Pro and the cons. Pro, a definition. Diagnosis required the isolation of the Fusariosis from clinical specimens, blood, zinc, cyanide, lungs, y other. Cons. Clinical manifestation are not disease TB, mimic use of the invasive arpergisosis, including central nervous system disease and the locally invasive infection. continue my video.
C'est une nouvelle menace qui plane sur les producteurs de bananes. Une menace bien plus grande que la cercospirose ou le charançon. Le Fusarium oxysporum. C'est un champignon déjà connu des planteurs. Il avait mis à terre la production mondiale de bananes dans les années 50. Aujourd'hui, il fait des ravages en Colombie. Et vu la mondialisation des échanges commerciaux, le risque de contamination est bien présent.
Quand on sait qu'il y a beaucoup de produits comme la tomate, comme les citrons, comme les fleurs qui sortent de ce pays-là, je me pose la question si elle n'est pas encore ici. Qu'il y ait des contrôles assez drastiques, parce que j'ai vu des photos, des diapos, je peux vous dire que ça donne une image apocalyptique, c'est-à-dire que le bananier s'éclate, les feuilles tombent, c'est pire comme si on avait piqué un champ de banane au glyphosate.
Les images apocalyptiques dont parle cet agriculteur, les voici. Des plantations à l'agonie et l'assurance de ne plus pouvoir produire de bananes sur ces sols. Car les spores du fusarium sont très résistantes. Elles pourraient survivre plus de 30 ans dans le sol et contaminer les terres avoisinantes au gré des ruissellements et des déplacements de marchandises ou de personnes. Aucun traitement ne l'éradique. Un scénario catastrophe pour le vice-président de la Chambre d'agriculture.
C'est la fin d'une production pour la mançonique pendant un certain nombre de temps, quoi. Donc pendant au moins 10 ans, donc j'avoue qu'on est très très inquiet et on suit ça de très très près parce que ça sera un changement complet de mode de production, des productions, donc on n'est pas encore prêt à ça.
Depuis la propagation de ce que l'on nomme aussi la maladie du Panama, les autorités françaises sont en alerte. L'Agence régionale de sécurité sanitaire préconise dans ce rapport la désinfection des matériels pouvant avoir été en contact avec le sol, ainsi que les conteneurs de marchandises en provenance de zones infestées. Un casse-tête qui implique la mobilisation.
You sent a plane in the Ecuador. In Ecuador, an analysis of the 18th for patients with hematologic malignancies demonstrated in the 60th day survival rate the prognosis for disseminated infection in sport with a mortality of the 17. The use of the prophylactic antifungals in the immunosuppressants patients does not seem to improve the prognosis since theoretically in the cold cell residence strength, the evolution of the infection in the directly related to the number of the neutrophils and the recovery from neutropenia seem to be the only factor that improves the prognosis. Continue my video.
So what I want to do today is to just review why Fusarium mycotoxins are an issue and look at the legal limits that apply, and then look at the factors influencing mycotoxin risk, and look at the situation we had for head blight and mycotoxin levels in 2012 and trying to separate those two. And then look at where we go on with regards to mycotoxin management. So first of all, the legislation. This was actually introduced into 2006, and it's European legislation. And we have legal limits for unprocessed wheat intended for human consumption. And it's very important to be aware that within this legislation, all farmers are classed as food operators. So those farmers amongst you, your customers, do not always see themselves as food operators, but according to legislation, they're food operators. And at the point of sale, it's their legal responsibility to ensure that wheat sold for human consumption is fit for human consumption. So it has to meet these legislative limits. So we have limits for deoxynivalenol, which I refer to as DON, zealerone, which I refer to as ZON, and there's been some proposed limits some time now for HT2 and T2, and we still don't have these, and they've actually changed again. We now have, or we're likely to have, a publication of investigative limits next year, and it's changed for wheat. It's going to be 50 ppb, or it's likely to be 50 ppb. And these investigative limits mean that as the Food Standards Agency and food operators, so again HGCA will be taken on this remit, have to monitor HT2 and T2 in cereals and cereal products. And where they are identified to be high, they have to investigate why they are high and what they can do to reduce them. We do have limits for feed, but they're only guideline limits, and again they were introduced in 2006. But again the Commission warned that if you just will set guidelines, if you ignore them, we'll set legislation. So it is important to be aware of guideline limits for feed as well. Also very important that some processors have lower intake limits, and this is if they're producing high fibre, whole grain products. They have to have lower limits at intake to meet the limits for their end products. And for this reason, it's very important to know what the end user requirements are, because if you're trying to get into the baby food industry, it's very difficult to get in there because of the low limits set for infant foods. So, the Fusarium mycotoxins, very important. These are produced in the field. So it's as a result of the Fusarium head blight. So they have to be controlled in the field. There's very little you can do once you've harvested the crop. You can get some reduction through cleaning, but you don't get a big reduction. The key ones, deoxynivalenol and HT2 and T2. These are close relatives within the group known as trichophosines. There's many others, and the one that's issued for UK cereal production is zealenone, which we refer to as ZON. Now, two species of Fusarium, which we commonly find, Graminearum and Culmorum, both produce DON and ZON. So we'll very frequently see them together. And Graminearum is by far the most potent DON producer. So that's the one which we really have to keep an eye on. So worst case scenarios for head blight, a warm dry spring inducing spore production on the crop debris, heavy rainfall in June. I'm referring now, this is England, so a bit later in Scotland. So heavy rainfall in June as the ears are emerging, splash those spores up onto the ear. And then some warm, humid conditions during flowering to allow those spores to germinate and get into the ear. And then also, Fusarium is monocyclic. We only have one infection event. But we get later in the season, as the crop ripens, we'll actually get saprophytic growth on the dead crop. And that's what we see with a delayed wet harvest, where we can see an increase in mycotoxins. So looking at the different crops, we see differences in susceptibility. And this is a percentage of crops exceeding legal limits. And this is 2002 to 2008. And for wheat, you see that the issue is really DON and zealenone, and we're averaging around 5% exceeding legal limit. So 5% is not a big issue for the industry. The problem is finding that 5%. And that's one of the major issues we have. And also the fluctuation. So in brackets there we have the range, and I'll come on to the ranges. For HT2 and T2, proposed limit of 50 ppb, much less of an issue in wheat. And in recent years, we haven't had any samples exceeding that limit. And again, we don't know why, but HT2 and T2 in recent years has fallen back in wheat. Big issues or potential issues for oats, but at the moment, as I say, it's investigative limits, and we are actively working on trying to identify what we can do for the issue on oats, and I won't cover that today.
Conclusion. Fusarious infections in the emergencies in the immunosuppressed paint. Immune with the wounds start out, it is important to get this in the mind, especially if the paint was risk factor. Is which the intentional care must be to establish and the early diagnostic and the vet therapeutic strategy. Continue my video. Thank you for protection. Thank you.